everyone. Welcome to BCS Coventry. This is our September meeting. And today we have Professor Sylvester from Coventry University. It will be talking on serious games, purposeful outcomes. It will break that down further, I believe. So Professor Sylvester is a professor in game science at Coventry University Center for Post-Digital Cultures. He is also co-founder of the GameChangers initiative. He has received multiple awards, but I'll let Sylvester tell us more about all these awards and any other thing about himself. You're very welcome, Sylvester.
Hi, everyone. Is it good afternoon or good evening? It's still bright out there, so it is a pleasure for me to be here today. So thank you very much for inviting. And I'm always sort of like happy to share the different types of work that we are doing within the context of serious games or game-based research or playful learning. I've got some slides. I'm going to share it now. Let me just start it. Right, let me see.
Sylvester, could I just ask, how do you want to handle questions? Do you like people to type it into the chat or ask at the end?
Maybe at the end, because I will not be able to see the chat when the slide is on.
Okay, right, thanks.
That would help. Thank you. Right, so I'm sharing it now. Everything's fine, yeah? Right, so just to give you a bit of a context of my work and where I'm based, the group which I'm part of, I'm leading a group which is called the Ludic Design. So that sort of refers to anything playful, which include games, gamification, so on and so forth. So the team has actually been doing this research for so many years, but we've just recently in 2022 joined the Center for Post-Digital Cultures. So we brought the whole team and the whole research into that center, because previously we were working under the banner GameChangers, and which was part of the digital media, disruptive media learning lab at Coventry University, where we are exploring different ways for teaching and learning. But our research is very much around the use of playful and game-based methodologies in designing different experiences. So we are interested in the open practice in play and game design. So working with those who are not familiar with games at all, because we have been doing a lot of research in serious games into the impact, the effectiveness in education, in healthcare, so on and so forth. So the intention for this group is to really think about the design methodologies for games and playful approaches, which could then help those who are not familiar with the approach to design their own games and to also implement it in their practice. So we are also interested in the impact of such approach and the impact of different types of media which have been used to enact or to demonstrate playful and game-based features. And the third areas that we are looking at is very much around being aware of emerging methods and technology, for instance, AI, the use of VR in different ways. So we are looking at different approaches for ensuring meaningful and purposeful outcomes in terms of the use of technology from through the lens of playful and game-based approaches. So yeah, so you can see my team members as well as our PhD students, and we still have our 10 PhD alumni are still interacting with us in our research, because they are in different parts of the world. So we are still working with them in exploring this research area. So GameChangers, as I mentioned before, it was established in 2015. So through through GameChangers, we've engaged with various stakeholders from different parts of the world, from Europe, UK, of course, in Asia, and also in South America, and also in the US, in exploring the context of play. Because essentially, when we talk about games and anything that has to do with interactive technology, there has to be a sense of play within the context of the design itself, especially in terms of building capabilities as well as resilience of the target audience or players, if you want to put it that way. So we have won a lot of awards, and 2 of them, which are shown here, are given by the Reimagine Education Award, gold in 2021, and recently we won a bronze for our approach in addressing sustainability and environmental awareness in different countries in Asia. So this has really pushed our work across the the different disciplines which are involved in this particular research. From computing, from engineering, from arts and humanities, from social sciences, so on and so forth. So it's an interesting area where it attempts to, in a way, cross all the different boundaries and integrate them as transdisciplinary approaches as well. And through GameChangers, we have explored different research questions and different practices, different interventions, and we are fortunate to be funded by various councils, for example, the UKRI, through the GCRF and Newton Fund, through ASRC, ASRC, EPSRC, the British Council, of course, British Academy, and also funding from the EU Commission. So we are fortunate to be able to address various research questions within the context of playful and game-based approaches for designing experiences in the various projects, and some of the stuff that we have learned through this project. I'm going to touch on them briefly today because we haven't got a lot of time to explore every single one of them. So what I find interesting in the work that we are doing, since we are very much focusing on the humanity part of design and the humanity part of tech and humanity part of whatever tools and applications we are creating to support education or health or any other domains, is the engagement with the stakeholders. We engage with school kids from very remote parts of Borneo, for instance, through to professionals who are working in the fuel industry, or and even farmers who are interested in using playful methodology for designing and redesigning the way that they engage with the customers when it comes to creating new products and so forth. So our work is very much around the design aspects that can inform someone to create various different solutions to their needs. So how do we design engaging and meaningful experiences? What are they? What are we trying to nurture? So those are the things that interest us in terms of what are the different types of impact, and what are the different types of development that we can actually support and create through the use of playful and game-based design methodologies. So one of the approaches that we use in the different projects and with different stakeholders is something that we call remixing play. So remixing play is about taking inspirations from existing engagement with playful approaches, trying to exploit the emotional connection that we have with something that is playful, something that will enable someone to engage with serious topics or sensitive issues, or something that will in a way sustain the engagement with that particular activity that we want to design. So we can learn a lot from play, and play is not just for young children. Play is common in adulthood as well. Bantering, having jokes and memes and things like that. Playful activities or playful design that will enable different types of messages to be communicated. Those are the things that we are so familiar with, especially with social media, so on and so forth. So we are interested in seeing how we can learn from play and create something interesting. And all of us are familiar with the industrial revolution in terms of the different new emerging technology that are going to change the way that we work and the way that we learn. But essentially, we are interested in human centricity. How do we ensure that it is sustainable? And we also need to protect the resilience or develop the resilience of all of us who are engaging with new emerging technologies, because things are moving very quickly. So we have to make sure that those who are going to engage with them are going to be developed. And yeah, we can have as many technology, as many new blue sky inventions out there. But if the people whom they are supposed to service, the people who are supposed to benefit from it are not ready, are not really prepared, we would not be having sort of like a more equitable and inclusive environment where everyone can actually benefit from emerging innovations, so on and so forth. And you might ask us that what has play got to do with all this? The next generation of workers need skills that focus on learning, innovation, and thinking. So we need to think about how do we then engage them in learning that could be more adaptable, learning that could expose them to different scenarios and something that they can role play in. Because playing will allow us to, in a way, try different types of identities, different types of approaches, and taking risk and coming together as a group, playing, quote unquote, or experimenting, so that the way that we adapt to whatever emerging new technology or new approaches or new challenges in the future. So we need to create new generation of workers who are able to engage and be more resilient in the way that they respond to challenges. So how do we engage playful values through gameplay? So playful values, for instance, the sense of ownership, the sense of autonomy, the sense of risk-taking, so on and so forth. How do we manifest this in gameplay and games? All of us are familiar with games, but games are just a particular example or instance of play, and not is in totality. But what we like about games is that games is a medium that will allow us to be able to track change and something that is happening within the activities in that particular game, and helps us to understand how someone develop the skills and how we can observe and analyze the impact of the activities within games. So creating games will help us to break the process of learning and playing, that will enable us to understand more about what's happening within the learning process or within the playing process. So during the pandemic, games have been, a godsend. So many people are able to explore new places, new environments without leaving their living room. They are able to interact with other players socially, and they are able to have some sort of normality during that particular period. And I myself have experienced a lot of benefit from playing games as well. And some of you might be familiar with these games. So I've been engaging with these games during the pandemic, and it really helps me to really develop certain skills and also engage with other players through back chats when you really discuss and talk about the different games that you are playing. So I've joined a lot of different forums on games, even though I'm a game researcher. But prior to the pandemic, because work has been so busy with different projects and so forth, I didn't really have a lot of time to play games. So the pandemic has provided a lot of space for me to re-explore games, and that's really helped my research moving forward in terms of working with different stakeholders who are interested in the use of games in serious manner. So there are so many different jargons and different phrases or different names that people are using when it comes to the use of play or the use of games in serious purposes. I would like to call it applied games as an overarching name for it. So they can be game-based learning, or they can be serious games. Serious games traditionally refers to digital games which are specially created for serious purposes, either for learning, either for health, either for any other serious purposes out there. But now it is used interchangeably with other approaches, for example, analog games, hybrid games, games like escape rooms, on and so forth. And game-based learning, especially when it's sort of like the main focus is in education and the way that we learn, you can either use commercially off-the-shelf games. So many teachers are using Angry Birds for teaching physics, for instance. Those games are not created for education, but they can be repurposed to encourage learning in the classroom. But you can also create bespoke games. So this is what we call serious games, because they are created especially for that particular purpose. But what I always say when I engage with other games researcher or practitioner is that it's not about what terminologies you want to use to refer to these different types of approaches, but it is actually what is the meaning behind the use of game-based approaches in your area, in your practice. So it's not about the jargons, but there are so many people out there are still debating what terminology to use, so on and so forth. And also, you must have heard the term gamification. So that's sort of an added complexity to the different terminologies that everyone is actually using. So gamification is usually, when you are using game-based aspects and designed for something that is not gameful. So something that is to encourage behavior. For example, Octopus Energy is using this in encouraging you to engage with, how do you save energy? How do you ensure you can get discounts on things? How can you win some scores and points? And Duolingo is another example of using gamification for encouraging people to learn language. But essentially, as I said before, regardless of the terminology that we are using, it's essential for people to understand that you can use game-based approaches in your design for enabling active engagement in whatever topics or whatever activities that you are creating. So that is the most important thing for me anyway. And there is no such thing as a fixed formula. There are many case studies and examples of the effectiveness of the use of games in various areas, but there are no standards. There are different frameworks that you can use. So we are interested in investigating further in terms of what makes the use of games so effective. What part of the mechanics or the dynamics of that particular games that will in a way enable someone to develop certain skills, for instance. So those are the things that we are very much interested in. Yeah. no formula. Some people say that, so how do we create this? There are so many different literatures as well as design frameworks that we can have a look at, but essentially this is one of the common ones on how you design learning into games. For instance, you have to intentionally design learning content. Obvious reason, what are the knowledge and skills required to advance in that particular game? What are different types of learning that you don't design intentionally, but it can happen? For example, collaboration can happen. You can learn about how to collaborate with someone. You can learn about how to be a team player, for instance. Things that we actually did learn, so we need to be able to evaluate and track what is actually happening within a particular game. And cheats, some people said, oh, you shouldn't introduce cheats. Cheats is interesting because people are doing additional research or additional activities within a particular game which will enhance their experience. So they are part of the design elements that we can include on there to help them in terms of giving hints or helping them to be able to go to a different website where they can learn a lot of different things, different skills, different techniques, and then they can implement it within a particular game. So yeah, so this is these are some of the general aspects that we can think about. But essentially, we need to think like a game designer, or you can think like a game player. All of us are familiar with different types of games, either board games or digital games. We need to think about what are the mechanics of those games? What are the different rules of that particular game? How do you proceed in that particular game, and what will be the dynamics in that game itself, in terms of progression, in terms of feedback loop, in terms of the interaction with other players, and what are the interconnection of the different mechanics in that game. For instance, you can pick something up, throw them, and then you need to in a way target certain objects in the environments where you are. So the interconnection of those mechanics will enable you to progress to the next stage where you can win some scores, perhaps through picking up something, throwing it to an object, and each time you are able to, in a way, break a vase, for instance, will give you certain scores and will give you feedback on your performance, perhaps. And when we talk about the aesthetics of games, this is how you interact with that particular game. Is it going to be like a board game? Is it going to be like a point and click? What are the different types of interfaces that we can actually create to enable us to engage with it? So if you look at games, it is like a system. So it's like creating a system. Yes, a lot of people say that, but how do we do this? How do we start? Especially working with different stakeholders who are not familiar with game design. We have worked with teachers, for instance, here in 2018, when we first engaged with teachers in Asia, really. So they are creating different games, and they were testing them out, so on and so forth. And it's quite interesting to see that there is a value in coming together and co-creating games, and addressing the gaps in your teaching, so that you will be able to, in a way, understand more about the way that you design something and the way that you test them, and the way that testing will influence the iteration of that particular game. So we have done a lot of research in this and working with different stakeholders who are creating their own games, and it's interesting to see the impact of what they have achieved in the classroom. So we always say that practice doesn't make perfect, right? Practice makes better. So we are not striving for perfection. Most of the time we are working with those who are not familiar with games, they are a bit unsure about how to create something, because they are thinking about creating something that is rigorous, something that is perfect for their use in the classroom. But it's all about learning through the process of designing. So designing something, testing them out, and then bettering that particular design, and then testing them and reflecting on them. So this is something that we have helped different stakeholders to be able to be more confident in designing games. And one of the very simple approach that we use with anyone really from different age groups is this remixing play flashcards. A great idea can stem from something that is already exists. So we can take inspiration from existing games and create quickly ideate new ideas. When we first tried this with teachers, we gave them 1 minute to quickly ideate game ideas, and some of them were able to create game ideas in less than half a minute, 30 seconds. They are able to say that I've got an idea of how to create a game using these game ideas and addressing this particular topic. For example, Jenga and climate change, you might be able to use Jenga blocks, create something similar, but using the blocks to represent different parts of the ecosystem. And how do you ensure the sustainability of this particular ecosystem in the way that you subtract them from the whole combination, or you add new stuff to it and see whether it is going to be stable or not. So some teachers are creating different types of games based on these particular ideas. So we've got this deck of cards, like digital versions as well as physical versions for teachers to use, and some of the stakeholders who are not teachers, especially those. It is also being used by people who are working within the marine biology sort of sector, because there are scientists who are working with the communities to create new solutions for encouraging people to think about pollution in coastal areas, so on and so forth. As an example, a game has been created using the same approach. The topic was homelessness, and the game inspiration was Monopoly. You might have read it on the BBC when it was featured once. And this game has been used by the City Council and used in so many different festivals in the UK in encouraging people to engage with the topic of homelessness, to understand more about our role in the community and in the society, and the challenges that homeless individuals would face. So this is something that has been created with the collaboration between the university, with charities, with the schools, the council. There's another one. The topic was language, and at that particular time when this game was created, Pokemon Go was a big thing. So the educators were very much interested in creating their own version of that. So they went through the process of creating, co-creating, testing the ideas, and we put them together with a team at the MIT in Boston. So the MIT has got a free software that can help to create location-based games. So these educators, without any experience at all, work with 2 students from the university and created this particular game where you can actually walk around Coventry and you can engage with Italian language, and you can do a lot of different quests. You can do a lot of different quizzes, so on and so forth. So it's quite interesting to see the process of designing this from a simple initial idea through to something that can be actually used for teaching. An example of hopscotch with science. This is in a school that is very far away from the main city. When we went there, we had to fly from Heathrow to Kuala Lumpur to another city called Kuching to another smaller city, smaller town which is called Miri, and Miri to another smaller town using like a twin otter, I think, to that particular airport, and then we had to take a boat upstream for 2 hours. So that was how far this village was, and they didn't have access to technology for teaching at all. So we co-created this game with them to encourage kids to work together and then learn about science. And you can see those who are not normally engaging in the classroom are engaging in teams and working together in solving puzzles and some questions with regard to science. And this is an example of a project funded by the EU Commission, where we are working with the communities in 5 countries in Europe, where they co-create different games for addressing the need to be aware of data literacy. So how do we encourage them to engage with serious topics concerning digital engagement, but through non-digital approach? And the reason being is we want to be as inclusive as possible, because so many people are not familiar with the digital. So how do we engage this community in such topic through an analog way, so they can actually practice it when they next engage with digital platform. They will be able to, in a way, implement or everything that they have learned. So we work with them, and these games are currently used by Coventry City Council with communities who are marginalized, especially in terms of access to the digital, as well as awareness of how they can protect themselves against misinformation and cyber theft, so on and so forth. So it's quite interesting working with the different groups. And now there are so many different games within this particular project which are downloadable. They are free to download. Everyone can download and print their own games. And some of them have been converted into digital games as well. So yeah, so essentially when we're working with teachers, one of the key things they talk about, yes, we can create games, we can try it out, we can use in the classroom, and we are happy with it. But how do we know that what we create is rigorous? How do we know how to track what is happening within that particular game? So this sort of link with our ongoing research in trying to understand more about learning versus gaming. It's like, how do we then track what's happening, and what is the relationship between the mechanics of gaming? What is the relationship with this particular mechanics with learning mechanics? For example, how we learn, the different types of activities that we can create within a learning context. So what are the interconnection? So this approach has actually been used by so many different other developers and designers now, based on the research that we have done. And this was part of the REF 2021 impact case for arts and design unit 32 in the last REF. And also where this game would situate, not just about what game mechanics we are using and how this mechanics will support learning, but in terms of where this learning should happen, where should it situate. So in terms of whether you use it as part of an introduction to a subject, or whether it is being used as assessment, or whether they are being used as means for encouraging people to revise on certain things. So yeah, so those are the things that we work with educators with to get them to understand more about where something would sit. And in terms of how do you map what we understand by learning, what are the different types of learning? There are so many different models out there, like Bloom's, Cobb's, problem-based learning, project-based learning, so on and so forth. How do we map this against the design of games? So we tried to create some examples. Here is based on Bloom's, of how do we think we can see the interconnection between game mechanics and learning mechanics. How do we then look at a list of mechanics and then test them out in terms of the connection with different mechanics of learning through the different thinking skills in Bloom. So we tested this out with different designers and different educators in helping us to understand more about the different interconnection. And this work is still ongoing. This is an example of a series of mini games which have been created to address cultural awareness, especially in multicultural organizations. There are issues in terms of different workers or different employees from different cultures working together. There have been a lot of misunderstanding of the way that people work in terms of the language itself or the ethics of working. So these are the things that we're trying to address. This is funded by Erasmus+. So what we did was we actually worked with different organizations in Europe in trying to understand more about the different objectives that we can include in the game. For instance, just as a simple example, say that the learning objective is to reflect on knowledge of cultural stereotypes and generalizations. So what could the learning mechanics be? So perhaps we want employees to hypothesize and reflect on certain scenarios. We may want them to answer different questions to help them to understand and revise or to revisit and reflect. Maybe give them some feedback and helping them to understand more about the decision they have made in certain scenarios, perhaps. And how can we then map this again games? So perhaps in terms of having hypothesis and reflection, we can create narrative and story. It can be endogenous fantasy, meaning that the fantasy is directly connected to the topic itself. We can use the action of selecting something through quizzes, perhaps, and we can show progression using scores and feedback that would add meaning to the particular scores. So how do we implement it? In this case, we use comic book star and dialogues to present stories. How do we embed questions within the particular stories? What are the different types of text, visual, and audio feedback that we can include? And how then we can help them to reflect on the correct answers for instance. So through this, this is just a simple first level design. We have in this particular game, we have broken them down into something that is more specific that will enable us to look at specific parts of that particular game and how we can then make our own decisions on how learning happen in which part of that particular game. And it has also been used in the creation of this game using RPG Maker. So this is very like Zelda-like game where we actually collaborated with Coventry University Library to help them to provide something that new students can use for orientation in terms of different services at the library and the use of different platforms in the library. So we use the same approach in connecting the what sort of learning that is going to happen and what types of game mechanics or game elements that we want to design within this particular game. I think this game is still live now if you want to try them out. And another one is an example of an activity that we did with some lecturers during the pandemic. Everyone remember during the pandemic, everyone was forced to teach through online platforms. In this case, Teams. Microsoft Teams is such a boring platform. So how do you teach something in an active way? So we receive a lot of requests from our colleagues at the universities. So we work with them in designing this. So they use the same approach in designing this using the mapping. So what would be the objectives? What would be the different types of mechanics of learning, the game mechanics that we can create? What are different types of resources we can then co-create with them? What are the different stories that we can do? And they were so invested in it. They created this and they used this for 2 cohorts online. And in the end, they also created a physical version of it. And we managed to write a paper on this in trying to understand more about what happened within this escape room. So this is a virtual escape rooms using Microsoft Teams and OneDrive. And on our website, on GameChangers website, there are guidance on how other people can create this as well for their own use. And there are versions where you can use Google and Zoom as well. And this approach has also informed our approach in one of the projects that is addressing racism. And in this case, it is to help people to be aware of modern slavery. So we have 2 versions. One is the physical version where people can engage with physical objects in addressing different learning objectives. And we also have like an online version for that, which has been used in the UK as well as in Europe. So why I'm showing, the idea of helping someone to co-design games in a more inclusive way, and then helping them to enhance the rigor and enhance the effectiveness of the games that they are creating through understanding more about the mechanics of games, as well as the mechanics of learning and how do you interconnect that. And through what we have done, as you can see on the screen now, this is just an example of the pathway to change and impact is long term. So the work that we are doing, we are still working with the same partners from the beginning till end. From GameChangers, we engage with our colleagues at the university as well as our international partners. And then we work with 9 partners in Europe in creating authoring tools for teachers to be able to create their own games. And then through creative culture, that was our first engagement with Malaysia, where we adapt our approach in the Malaysian culture, where we actually work with schools in very remote parts of Borneo in co-creating games. And this has spawned 2 new projects funded by UKRI. Creative Culture 4.0, we work with the Ministry of Education to train teachers in Malaysia in co-creating games. And ESSES, we expanded that to Vietnam and Indonesia, where they are using the playful and game-based methodology in co-creating resources, which are not limited to just games. They create co-created spaces. They co-created different initiatives, different ways of learning, especially when the project itself was launched during the pandemic. So the issues of teaching and learning in terms of engaging with young people who don't have access to the internet, even so they can't even do online learning. So here we co-created games. We co-created something which we call STEM bucket, where STEM learning resources that they can play with. So we created this, and these games are being delivered, where they were delivered to young people in their homes, so they can actually learn in a home setting rather than engaging with teachers, because they didn't have access to teachers at all. And these projects have spawned into 3 new projects which are live now. The first one is IHD, working with accessibility, using game-based approaches, serious games approaches, engaging with young people who are disabled, who are accessing higher education, or who are thinking about accessing higher education, how we can support them to prepare them for that. And another project which is called FAIR, using art-based methodology for engaging the community in climate awareness. And the third one with our partners in Vietnam, which is called Game Aid. And this one is through the response of how AI has really influenced the way that teachers would look at teaching and learning. So they want to understand more about how to use AI. So here we are going to use OpenAI to co-create serious games that is going to teach educators about AI. So it's quite a mouthful, but it's a way for learning about games and AI and how we can empathically create something that is going to help educators. Yeah, so AI itself, we are also looking at different ways of working with teachers. We have worked with teachers in Coventry in engaging with AI in a playful way, and mostly generative AI, and also working with different educators in Vietnam, as I've mentioned before. And we're also looking at VR. This is an example of some stuff that our PhD students are looking at. So we also look at game-based methodology for designing VR scenarios. And this is something that some of you might be more interested in terms of something that is more computing-oriented, where we are working with partners in Italy, where they are creating trackers for the quality of road using mobile phones, but they want to encourage people to use it. So we actually created sort of like a framework for how data that you track can actually inform events in games. So it can generate different levels and different landscapes in a game, in a mobile game, based on the data that you collect on your mobile phones. on the quality of roads. So this is being used in Italy mostly at the moment. So yeah, so we are trying to look at all sorts of different things, from something that is more inclusive, engaging people in the design of games, through to evaluating the impact of games, and through to something that is more emerging using AI, using procedural generated games and looking at VR, so on and so forth. So we are looking at it from different perspectives, but essentially we are interested in playful and game-based design methodologies for everything, really. We don't limit ourselves to education. We do a bit of work in health, and we're also looking at different other fields and areas where such knowledge can help someone to develop new products or new experiences or new training even. So yeah, but in terms of playful learning, this is one of the key things we are looking at. It is something that is important. It is being looked at in different countries in the world. So this is something that we are continuing to engage with. Just to show you these slides, really, in terms of the impact of learning. So how we can actually contribute towards it through the lens of playful learning and game-based learning. So yeah, so I hope that that makes sense. I'm trying to sort of like skim through the different things that we are doing and try to make some sense of a story of how important it is to onboard someone, to create something, and to help them to practice build in making it more rigorous, and then looking at something that is more emerging, something that is going to be new, something that is going to be challenging in terms of how we can create new products or new game-based solution using new technologies which are not here yet, perhaps. But as long as we are ready for it, I think that's going to help us. So you can see my book here as well, where I talk about some of this, really, in how we can use the science of games in informing experiences that we can create within a hybrid space. Yeah, so thank you very much for your attention, and yeah, I'm happy to answer any questions if you have them.
Hi, Sylvester. You put up a slide with a link to a number of games. Could you type the address into the chat so we can
Right.
Please?
Is that the one with the data literacy games?
I remember now. We've had a lot of information since then.
I know that a lot of
I was trying to cut it off the screen. I thought, I know, it's just slide.
I think it's the data literacy. I'm going to see if I can write on chat. Let me see.
No, it got .eu in it.
That's the one. And our website is, put it on here. So you can see a lot more other stuff here that you can download that you can reuse. For instance, the escape rooms as well in the game, the GameChangers one.
Right, okay, thank you. Right, I'm done.
Thank you very much, Sylvester. Do we have any questions?
I think everyone is tired. It's a long day.
Yeah. I'll start off with this, Sylvester. I see you've done projects across the world. Have you encountered any cultural barriers or challenges to game mechanics, and what if so, what are they?
Yes, I think the first project that we did so many years ago, probably in 2012, really has really taught us a lot of lessons. We were working with teachers in Coventry, where we are actually talking about sexual coercion. So we thought that, oh, we want to create a game that is glitzy, that is beautiful, sort of thing. And then when we presented to the teachers, we realized that they said, this is not what we want. It's not culturally relevant. We've got like Coventry is multicultural, so we need to ensure that some of the culture are represented within that as well. So in the end, we created something that is so simple, but it was so impactful. So that was our first lesson. And since then, we have learned, we have implemented the same approach in our different projects, especially in Asia, where we are working with people from different cultures, is to really get them to take control of the process. So we are there to guide them. So most of the time, when they were creating games, they would take inspiration from traditional games because they are so aware of their own traditional games. They were very proud of them, so they will use it as example to create a game for learning. And from there, we introduce them to so many different other games where they can learn about different game elements and mechanics. So we have a lot of issues in the beginning in terms of communicating the language, in terms of how important it is to use playful learning and game-based learning in their context, because most of the time playful learning is considered childish. But through the process, they realized that the process of learning through a playful methodology helps someone to have the autonomy to engage, have the agency to respond, and have the curiosity to engage with that particular learning. But yeah, so we did have problem, but we are able to embed it as part of our approach.
Thank you. Does any other person have a question? Stephen?
Hi, Sylvester. Hi, thanks for that. Just maybe a couple. How do you measure success? You know, what metrics, like short term, maybe long term, but and on that basis, what do you think has been the most successful on any metric, on which metric you measure by?
Right, we have used so many different metrics going through the process or pathway. When we first started, we used a lot of self-reported stuff. Not really empirical, because you don't really measure the gain of knowledge or the gain of expertise, skills, so on and so forth. And we realized that the target group, especially in terms of education, the target group whom we should be focusing on are the teachers, not the learners. The teachers are the ones who are the change agents. So they are the ones who are going to engage with young people in terms of their learning. So they are the ones who are going to assess the skills and the knowledge gains, sort of thing. So what we focus on are the change of practice with teachers through demonstrated practice. So we go and observe the way they teach, and they will engage with us in terms of the progression from designing something simple through to something that is sophisticated enough to enable them to assess through the game that they create. So we look at that as our success factor in terms of the progression of the teachers through the process itself. We also engage with observing their skills in developing those games, and other skills in terms of the open practice. When I mean by open practice is the community of teachers working together and exchanging games and repurposing different games that they have created. So that's one of our KPI in terms of mid-term and long-term. So long-term is how many games have been repurposed in so many different ways in co-creating games, and teachers are giving us feedback on how effective they were in the classroom. So as an example, that is a simple example of how we measure success in all these projects. Of course, we have other stuff like all the RCT stuff that we did in terms of the randomized control trials and trying to understand more about knowledge gain. We do all that as well. But I think I'm more satisfied with seeing how teachers have been developed through the process. And I think the most successful I've seen is the outcomes from the SS project, especially during the pandemic. At first, we didn't actually know what are we going to do with this project, because we can't be there. They can't be outdoor. They can't, Vietnam was quite lucky because they were able to go outdoor and engage with people and stuff. So through that project, we understand that we have to trust the project partners we are working with, we would prepare them and engage them with the methods, with the way that we do things in terms of game-based approaches and playful methodologies. Then they would go and implement them. So in that case, we also evaluated the partners on how they implemented with the stakeholders. So through that particular process, they managed to create more than 10 different case studies of different ways that are using it through creating resources for teaching and learning for people who don't have access to digital technology, and how young people are engaging with learning through to creating spaces. For example, they created playgrounds in Vietnam, which have been invested by the government because they have seen how effective it was. So they are creating more playgrounds to support learning in those schools, and using traditional games as part of their learning as well. And also the creation of different training materials for teachers. For instance, in Malaysia, so far they have trained 600 teachers across Malaysia in the approach, and the teacher training college have adapted our approach and included as part of their training as well. So I see this as a big success because it's not our doing, because we were there to influence and to inspire them in terms of the methods, but we were not the one who are actually running the show. They were. And the fact that they were the ones who are doing it, the impact is much, much more significant, because we are not, even though I'm from Asia myself, but it felt like if we were the ones who led all the different interventions, it will be like bringing Western principles and philosophies into that particular culture, and it's not going to work. And yeah, so I could say that the pandemic was a blessing in disguise. So that was a big success for us. And now we are working with the Ministry of Education in Malaysia, in Vietnam, and in Indonesia as well. So that is quite cool. Yeah.
Great.
Hope that makes sense.
Yeah. Very good.
All right, thank you. Any other question or questions? All right, so in the absence of any other questions, thank you very much, Professor Sylvester Arnab. Please let's give him a round of applause. And
Thank you
physically or digitally. Thank you very much, and thank you for sharing with us. Very interesting talk.
Thank you for staying on after work.
Yes, thanks, Sylvester. It's been most interesting.
Thank
Yeah.
you. Thank you.